And I will start sharing my screen and the music.
All right. Let me know when you're ready. I'll admit all.
And go.
Welcome, everyone. We'll begin shortly. So just hang in there. Go ahead and mute yourself. I see most of you are. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Good.
Chrissy, how are you? Hi, Dr. Bowman.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
Nice. Good. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
It's a busy fall already, and it isn't fall. So maybe that means it's been a busy summer.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you ready, Dr. Sundstrom?
I am ready anytime you and Chrissy are ready.
Okay, let's get going. First I want to introduce myself, but we need to welcome everybody that's here. I'm so proud of Chrissy, and I know y'all are too. And so we're happy that you're here. Some dissertation defenses aren't public. So here we're lucky that we have this opportunity to invite everybody to hear a genuine, scholarly, and scientific presentation of the results of her research studies. So I'm Dr. Bowman. I have been her chairperson for the committee for quite a while now. With me, and part of the executive committee is Dr. Peggy Sundstrom. She has been instrumental in her feedback and getting Chrissy towards the end of her ultimate goal as a scholar. And so we appreciate that, Dr. Sundstrom. And of course, Chrissy Mackey, everybody, our doctoral candidate. She's worked hard. And I'll come back to that in a minute, but first let's talk about process. So normally in a normal defense, and we hope that that's going to be the case here, I introduce the audience, and I'm going to, the candidate, the doctoral candidate, and then explain the process. So first off, we're going to allow Chrissy to present her research. This is a rite of passage, if you will, towards a doctorate. Many have gone before us. So we're certainly not making any of this up, but at the same time, it's a critical step in the process because it shows that she can communicate with her peers, her scholarly peers, understands the overarching goal of our responsibility with regard to research in general. And she feels that, the defense also fills the scientific criterion of a doctoral learner. So after she presents her research, then we're going to have questions. We'll start with Dr. Sundstrom, of course, and then I'll step in and I'll probably have a couple questions too. And we'll open to the audience briefly, and then Dr. Sundstrom and I will excuse ourselves and have a phone chat, and then we'll return. But while we're away, the audience can continue to ask questions. So I'll help you out when we get that point. So without further ado, I present to you our doctoral candidate, Chrissy Mackey.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Chrissy Mackey, and I go by Chrissy, but I want to share with you this quote. Gamification is the design that places the most emphasis on human motivation in the process. In essence, it is human-focused design by Yukai Chow. Now, I personally have come from a background of gaming. My undergraduate degree is in education. My master's degree is in leadership development. So this all just naturally flows together for me. And this is something that I've been very passionate about, using games for training. And as you'll see, as we go on this adventure, the training process using games for me is a little bit different than gamification. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But let me tell you, watching people really understand what it is that they're learning while they're playing a game is one of the most amazing feelings in the world. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm going to take you on a journey, and I would really like you to come with me on this journey. There's going to be some stuff that's a little heady. There's going to be stuff that's funny. You are permitted to laugh. But at the end of it, my ultimate goal is to present to you the journey that I have been on for 10 years. There we go. So we're going to start, my friends, by going on an adventure. And before we can actually go on that adventure, I have to disclose to you a long backstory of exposition. This exposition encompasses 7 years of research and was presented to my former committee and chairperson back in November of 2020. It was approved and then submitted to the Institutional Review Board, or the IRB, and the study began in June of 2021. In order for you to appreciate the adventure and fully embrace the journey that we are going to embark on, I kind of need to share with you, the problem that I was trying to solve, some of the theoretical and conceptual framework that I built my study on, and finally, some of the methods and designs that I used in creating the study. This is all necessary, otherwise none of it'll make sense. To put the problem into context, I have spent 7 years researching the concept of applied gaming and gamification. To give you some really quick definitions, gamification is the application of game techniques, game devices into a training session. A lot of people tend to take this to mean, oh, we're going to divide people into teams and we're going to assign points for things, and that's gamification. Sure, that's gamification. That is not what I do. What I do, I call applied gaming. And applied gaming is, I do your organizational analysis. I see where your training gaps are, and I take those training initiatives and I go to my game cabinet and I'm like, which game is going to fit to help train these particular skills? So applied gaming for me is quite different than gamification. Gamification happens to be the buzzword in the business world. So going back to the problem, when our timeline fragmented, when Thanos did the snap, it eliminated half the life on this planet. And I'm pretty sure we were all part of that. And we went to another zone, time zone, whatever, where we were all in lockdown for way too long. So we had to make adjustments to figure out what our new normal was in the world. So in November of 2020, I successfully defended the proposal for this study. The first part of this presentation is a brief overview of the research used to address the problems. So here is the general problem. Now it says on the slide, a lack of qualitative information regarding participants' understanding of training of any kind, but specifically with the use of games. That's a lot of words, and out of context, that sounds kind of rude. However, what that means is much of the research available in the field of gamification or applied games focuses on the quantitative aspect of the studies, like the results of quantitative studies. That means they're taking data from surveys, they're taking data from assessments, and they're putting all of these numbers together. I personally love numbers, and I think they're magnificent. However, you also need to hear from your participants. If you've ever had to go to the doctor with any kind of chronic illness, you probably have run into that situation where, well, your numbers look fine, so you're not in any pain at all, while you're sitting there in excruciating, agonizing pain. This happens to me frequently. So numbers don't give you the whole story. This research is meant to supply an insight into the participants' feelings and thoughts and observations of their own abilities. So the specific problem is that the current available research lacks discussion of the participants' experiences in transferring newly acquired skills. And these are a lot of words that affect the acquisition, blah, blah, blah. Basically, there's not a lot of detail or data out there in the scientific community that talks about the participants' understanding of what they're doing when it comes to learning new skills that they're training for, even through regular training methods, and then applying those skills to work. As we'll see very briefly in the next few slides, transference is very nuanced, as is game theory and things like that. So we'll get to that here in just a moment. If my slides will move, that would be great. There we go. So this was an exploratory case study, meaning exploratory. We're out exploring, we're deep diving into the crevices of my participants' brains and thought processes. It is a case study, meaning I only had one group of people, and that was a total of 6 participants. That just means that I cannot necessarily generalize my findings to the greater population because it was just one group of people. I recruited 6 participants between the ages of 18 and 60 from various professional backgrounds. I used triangulation, meaning I had 3 types of data. We had semi-structured interviews at the end of the campaign. There were journal prompts and entries that the participants sent me during the campaign, and I had my own log of social observations. The results were amazing. The participants developed the ability to recognize learned skills. They were able to transfer new skills from what they learned in the game to their daily lives, and they had improved social interactions. Some of these were not things that I was expecting. Part of the requirements from the previous presentation was to give an overview of the theoretical and conceptual framework for the study. In other words, I had to discuss the theories I would be building upon and the concepts I would be integrating into my study. So this following 3 slides, we're going to go through hopefully quickly. If you have questions about any of these, feel free to write them down and we'll get to them, at the question and answer section. So the studies from the 1970s, whoops. Sure, that works, but clicking the button doesn't. All right. So the studies from the 1970s focused on development of leaders, the individual, over leadership, which is the process. Throughout the next few decades, scientists focused on how to train the individual through engagement and creating a scenario in which the person was actually actively engaged in their own development. In 2007, Ancona et al., a whole group of people, finally published a model for leadership development that has become a main standard within the leadership development industry called the Sloan Leadership Model. It has 4 key capabilities for leaders in the global setting, and those are sense making, relating, visioning, and inventing. Now, that is obviously one of the foundations of this study. The next foundation of this study is critical thinking. It's also a highly researched topic and one that is highly sought after by many corporate positions, but particularly in the context of leadership. Critical thinking involves the employment of the Sloan leadership model kind of in this way. Asking questions, defining a problem, and examining evidence is sense making. Analyzing assumptions and biases, avoiding emotional reasoning is relating. Avoiding oversimplification is visioning, and considering other interpretations and tolerating ambiguity is inventing. Would the participants, my participants, be able to recognize their own abilities within the realm of critical thinking? That was not actually a question I sought to answer, but it was an assumption that the participants would, in fact, be able to think critically while engaging with each other and the fictional world around them. So 3 more areas of research that helped to form the questions that I ended up asking to develop the answer during the study included transference, adult learning theory, and game theory. All 3 of these topics are extremely nuanced and they're very intense. So I'm going to give you really brief information without trying to overload you with the boring stuff before we get on to the fun stuff, which is, of course, the study. So transference refers to the degree to which a person can effectively apply knowledge, skills, and attitudes gained during a training context to their job, which is cited from Baldwin and Ford, 1988. Those are a lot of words. Basically, it's how well a person applies the training they just sat through to what they're doing. Kaufman and their team in 2014 recommended a total of 20 hours for training skills, especially in a game setting. And that's just one skill per 20 hours of gamified training. Adult learning theory is also quite nuanced in how it is both presented and researched. In the context of this research, I focused on the concepts of tacit versus informal learning theory, meaning patterning behaviors to model other success versus possessing rudimentary concepts of high-level skills coupled with a distinct thought process of how to employ those skills. Man, this is a lot of information, and I know like it doesn't even really make sense to me, right? But to figure it out and put it in layman's terms, it's a do as I do versus use critical thinking and apply what you know. And both types of learning theory are valid. It depends on what you're doing. As an example, if you are working in a machine shop, you want to follow the process as it is laid out. It'd be do what I do. Do it as it said. If you are trying to study for a test in a collegiate setting, you are going to want to use the informal theory of being able to apply the concepts that you know of how to study to a new topic. For example, to present this information to you, I rely on my ability to come up with an outline for public speaking. However, I need to throw in a PowerPoint presentation, and I have done that before, but not with, I can't really say not with any degree of success because I graduated. So, I mean, there was success there, but it's not my forte. So having to learn and adapt and figure out how to best make PowerPoint work for me is an example of informal learning theory. Finally, game theory. This was an interesting topic to research. It's even more nuanced than the other two. It's highly technical, but it served as the foundational framework for this study. Game theory, according to Gao et al. In 2018, is a mathematical framework for the analysis of the decision-making of multiple self-interested agents whose choices will lead to mutual effects on others' payoffs. Whew, that's a lot. In layman's terms, game theory is the framework from which a researcher can determine the success of the group. It's really simple. The basis of game theory is what started this entire study, trying to determine how people can work together and how they feel about working together to achieve a desired outcome. There we go. And finally, for the concept of this, there is a lot of research about applied computer gaming. In fact, it started back in the 60s at Harvard School of Business. Applied computer games refer to the use of various computerized games and simulations employed for leadership development. Green and Shubik, 1960-1968, were citing different quantitative studies that they had done on the use of applied computer games, specifically simulations for the business schools of the time. These types of games tend towards the simulation of various leadership scenarios during which the trainee would have to make selections and decisions based upon the information provided. Some of the earliest role-playing games were known as multi-user dungeons, or MUDs, and that's kind of where these come into play. They were text-based games that you basically answer yes, no, left, right, things like that. And they combined creative writing, collaborative storytelling, and creative problem solving, and were also the precursors to massively multiplayer online role-playing games, or MMORPGs. I mean, MUDs are still played today because some people really like them. Even the AI that is associated with Amazon has a type of MUD as a skill, and it is a voice-activated MUD style game. I've tried it, and I died faster in that than I did when I played Oregon Trail. Games for training purposes were fairly widespread among the top 500 Fortune 500 companies such as General Electric, United Airlines, and Johnson & Johnson in the 60s. Faria 1976 tells us this. In Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, the writers included information about a computer simulation that Captain James T. Kirk was said to be the only one to beat, the Kobayashi Maru. Most of the people sitting in this room probably know the Kobayashi Maru. Unfortunately for Kirk, it was later revealed he cheated and the impossible scenario was still impossible and he still had to make the ultimate sacrifice. So when massively multiplayer online role-playing games began to gain popularity in the mid to late 90s, businesses started turning their eyes towards using these virtual worlds as a training ground. And then finally, in the early 2000s, Blizzard Entertainment developed World of Warcraft, which introduced a combination of the MUD chat-based system and the physical role-play environment of a fantasy world brought to life. Dr. Nick Yee of Stanford University began conducting research in the application of various aspects of World of Warcraft, everything from avatar creation to leadership of high-end raid guilds to business scenarios. Dr. Yee's work laid the groundwork for this study. Dungeons & Dragons was, however, the first game of its kind to be produced. It started as a game called Chainmail, which broke off from the war games that the creator and their friends played so frequently. War games tend to focus on the recreation of specific battles or wars, such as World War II, in the form of the game Axis and Allies, and allows players to control armies and make decisions regarding how and where and when the armies move, prompting a potential for a fictional outcome to the battles. Chainmail did keep that concept. However, instead of basing it in real world battles, it moved the concept to that of high-end fantasy battles like the Battle of the Five Armies from the Lord of the Rings. And it allowed players to control individuals rather than the entire army. Whitwer in 2015 and Peterson in 2012 both talked extensively about this as they were talking about Dungeons and Dragons and its creation and development. In 1972, Gygax introduced the D20 system as a way to better determine outcomes of the war games they were playing. The icosahedron, the 20-sided die, provided a 5% chance on potential outcomes, positive or negative. A 20 was considered a critical success. A 1 was considered a critical failure. As Gygax and their cohorts developed the system, they kept in mind that children should also be able to play the game, and using Gygax's own children, began developing the system as a way to teach mathematics to younger players. In 1974, Gygax published the very first edition of Dungeons and Dragons using his D20 system, and that would go on to be the basis for many future tabletop role-playing games, or TRPGs, and MMORPGs, like World of Warcraft. So that was a lot of stuff. And I promise this is the last boring thing before we move on to the fun and exciting stuff of the study. So the exploratory aspect of this case design, I've said, was to delve in and really get down and see how the participants were feeling about everything. We played 5 4-hour sessions. So that would be 20 hours of gameplay. And I used what's called snowball sampling, in that I made a post and it was able to be shared and reshared among all of the different social media platforms during COVID lockdown. So that was about the only way I was going to get participants, since you couldn't leave your house. The sample was the population was pretty much the global population via the internet. I had 9 initial contacts, 6 of whom actually ended up participating. And the demographics were, I had 2 males, 2 females, and 2 non-binary. I had 2 18 to 25-year-olds, 2 26 to 35-year-olds, and 2 46 to 55-year-olds. 2 were entry-level employees, 2 were intermediate level employees, 1 was a mid-level, and 1 was a senior level. And finally, when it came to data collection, we had 3 different venues of data to come in. We had the weekly journal prompts. There were 2 sets of prompts. However, not all of my participants sent in prompts. I think 5 of 6 of them did. I had semi-structured interviews at the end of the 5 sessions. Again, only 5 participated of the 6. And then I also had my field note observations, which included notes for changes that the GM needed to make based on the participants' abilities to talk their way out of things. And there was also some conflict resolution that was able to be done among the participants that was not only civil, but beneficial to the conversation and the data at hand. Whew, that was a lot. That was your exposition. That was your backstory. Now we get to go on the adventure. So I hope you'll come along with me because this is the fun part. These are the research questions I set out to answer. How do participants describe their ability to transfer learned skills from the game to their daily social and working lives? Research question number 2, how do participants describe the significance of their ability to transfer learned skills from the game to their daily social and working lives? Research question number 3, what are the participants' perceptions of personal development in social interaction skills after completing the campaign? I feel it is important to note at this particular moment that when I started this entire process, I only had 2 research questions, and they were the first 2. The third research question came from the data. As I was compiling data, I was noticing more and more perceptions of social interactions and social connectivity. And I didn't really have anything to speak to for that data. That data was so strong, I had to develop a new research question. And that is something that qualitative research allows for the researcher to do. This particular table here is a very simplified table of the data, the analysis of the data. We had 3 major themes, 9 sub-themes, and all of them answered the research questions. For example, the main theme was skill identification. Skill identification, social interaction, and leadership skills. Those were the 3 major themes, and they were intertwined among all of the research questions. So the first sub-theme under skill identification answered research question number 1. The second, research question number 2, and the third, research question number 3. The same for social interaction and leadership skills. So we're going to go really far into this here because this is the fun part and this is exciting. As soon as my slides decide to cooperate. There we go. Okay, research question number 1, major themes and sub-themes. Again, research question number 1, how do participants describe their ability to transfer learned skills from the game to their daily social and working lives? So to be scientific, the analysis of the data within the interview transcripts and weekly journal prompts demonstrates the increase in the participants' abilities to identify the skills they found themselves using in the game and how they adapted the skill usage to their working life. The data satisfies the question. But let's talk about these here, okay? So the main theme was skill identification. In Bloom et al. 2019, skill identification was the initial part of participants moving forward with either closed skills, which is a reproduction of procedure for completion of task, or open skills, which is the accomplishment of a task using the general principle. As sessions progressed, participants expressed their increasing ability to look at a situation through the context of the game and select the appropriate actions to problem solve, which is a demonstration of open skills. Now, they didn't do it just in the game setting. They were doing it in the game setting, but they were also doing it in their daily lives, which is something that they hadn't done before. Main theme number 2 is social interactions. And I'm going to delve into this one a little bit deeply because this one actually frames the context for the entire study and the need to switch from what I was originally planning to do to this because of COVID-19. Social interactions. Lothgren and Pfefferman in 2007 identified the human factor within the world of Warcraft. The team noted the strong division of those who would quote unquote troll others by leading infected NPCs into low-level areas to kill everyone, and those who would attempt to assist the infected and heal them. So here's a really quick summary of what was going on. In 2007, actually it was 2006, I believe, Blizzard Entertainment had introduced a new high-end raid boss, and it had this feature called Corrupted Blood. And it was supposed to affect everybody just within the instance for as long as they were in the instance. But a bug in the programming made it so that they were able to leave the instance, still have the corrupted blood infection, and then subsequently infect anybody they came in contact with. Some people were doing this particular raid, acquiring the corrupted blood pathogen, and then going out and spreading it just because they could. Others were trying to heal the people who had been infected. Now, this wasn't just limited to players. The players who were infected by the corrupted blood could also go to the non-playing characters, the NPCs, the one who gave quests, and infect them. It was a mess. Till that point, the CDC had no way of tracking how viruses and pandemics would spread because they didn't have a program that allowed for the human component. When this happened, this became the study that helped the CDC focus on how people were going to interact and how they were going to spread the virus. So when COVID broke out in China in 2019, they already had an idea of how fast it was going to spread, where it was going to spread, and how long things would take because of this study. Now, to put it into context of my study, there were several people. Well, there was one person in particular who had absolutely no experience with Dungeons and Dragons, let alone any other role-playing game. So instead of my participants making her feel like she didn't belong, that she should, not play, that she should just sit back and watch, they actually helped her. They would say, hey, you're a bard, you have bardic font. You can cast that, and that will give a +2 to this, or whatever. They were telling her, making suggestions to her of what would be helpful. They asked her, what skills do you have? This would come in handy here. What spells do you have? This would work here. They were teaching her and giving her ways to look at how everything worked together within the world. She went from having 0 confidence and 0 experience in playing Dungeons and Dragons to being a very confident, possibly even overconfident bard within 2 sessions. And it was amazing to watch because she was supported and she was helped by her community. Moving on. Main theme number 3 is leadership. Brown in 2011 noted that role-playing games disrupt the Salone leadership model by not having a designated and permanent team leader. The team leader is selected by the team up group based on experience, skill, knowledge, etc., providing numerous opportunities for players to take part in leadership positions. That is 100% true. The Sloan leadership model does not allow for emergent leadership. And emergent leadership was one of the factors of leadership that was really prominent in my study. People you wouldn't expect to step up and take control of a situation were stepping up and taking control. They were scared. They thought they were going to be shut down. One of them disclosed to me for data purposes that they were schizoaffective, ADHD, on the autism spectrum, and all of these other issues that really were trained to say, oh, well, you don't have any social skills. That particular person was able to take charge and lead the team to several different victories, one of which included talking their way out of a fight, which was pretty impressive. So that person actually gained more confidence in their leadership abilities from playing this in this study. And just really fast here, I want to point out the sub-theme 1 under skill identification, which is weakness identification, participants were able to express their abilities to identify areas where open skills would be helpful to complete tasks or even problem solve. It would be helpful if I could remember to write down my grocery list and take it with me to the store. Things like that. And then in decision making, in the case of the participants, they were able to make full use of their social skills in coming to an effective or even ineffective decision. Through talking over the possible solutions, they shared a mindset, a plan, and a goal for resolution of the problem at hand, allowing them to make that collective decision, which is supported by Hesse et al. From 2015. Don't worry, I got 2 more questions and I'm like really excited about this. So you're in for a treat. Okay, so the next question was, how do participants describe the significance of their ability to transfer learned skills from the game to their daily social and working lives? Again, the analysis of the data said that they demonstrated an increase in the ability to identify the significance of identification in the skills they found themselves using in the game and the adaptation of those skills to their daily lives. So we went over all of the main themes. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of the sub-themes here because the main themes are the same throughout. In this particular case, we've got problem identification. Pearl et al. In 2019 clearly remarked that identifying problems was one of the 5 crucial steps in critical thinking. A second step that was also employed by participants was that of presenting multiple potential solutions before deciding on the direction to go. And oops, I can't click there. So there were several situations in which they were able to identify the problem, and then 2 or 3 people would give solutions to the problem, and they would collectively decide which of those solutions would be best for the team and for the future of the campaign. Number 2, right here, delegation. Brown and Yan, 2011 and 2014, identified soft skills such as critical thinking, team leadership, and creative problem solving as skills that can be learned through experiential games. Specifically, the games challenge the Sloan leadership model by not having the permanent dedicated leader. Instead, the team delegates the leadership position to the most qualified player. And I've talked about that already, so we know how that turned out for them. And then finally, the emotional response. In some cases, participants were able to identify where their emotional response would have resulted in poor decisions or outcomes, both in the game and in their daily lives. So if we want to extrapolate from the data that I've researched from Miriam in 2008, adult learning is a multidimensional process which also involves emotions for the brain to make meaningful connections. In other words, what we're getting from the literature that was the foundation for this study is that the participants were able to recognize, hey, if I do this and it is an emotional response, it's going to make my teammates upset and it's not going to go the way I'm hoping it will go. All right, research question number 3. How do participants perceive their development in social interaction skills after completing the campaign? Again, this one came from the data. It was surprising and exciting all at the same time. We have, problem resolution. They were able to do their thing and work everything out together. And the same with empathy. They were collaborating together on how to solve a problem, and they were working in a shared empathic environment, especially in the case of one of the scenarios where they were talking with a mechanical bird that everybody just suddenly fell in love with. And they didn't want to kill it, so they set it free, which ended the session early because they actually needed to kill it. But that's fine. It was fun. And it was interesting to observe and to watch. But I want to talk about, one of them, which I don't think I actually wrote down properly, but that's okay because we've already discussed it a lot. It would be under conflict resolution, I believe. but we've discussed emergent leadership. Emergent leadership was one of the factors one of the data points that came out of this study a lot. And that is simply due to the fact that role-playing games in general tend to allow for different people to take charge depending on their experience, their skill level, their particular archetype, depending on what kind of a game you're playing, etc. So emergent leadership is another area that was very fascinating to learn from this particular study. So there we go. Yay, it worked. We're going to talk about next steps because every research project has next steps. I found an article from 2018 in which the researchers explored the use of online role-playing games and virtual reality technology for working with and training persons with high-functioning autism. I thought that was pretty spectacular. It was one of the first studies I've ever come across that actually explores neurodiversity in the context of training through gamification or even applied gaming. The study was by Key and Moon, and it supported the idea that virtual reality-based gameplay enhanced the social interaction performances of children with high-functioning autism. The children were between 10 and 14 years old. With more and more awareness being brought to neurodiversity, I believe there is a potential to study the effects of traditional role-playing games on the development of desirable leadership skills and competencies. Just simply because we don't think about those who might be on the autism spectrum or who might have other debilitating mental health disorders. We don't think about them in the context of leadership, and we really need to start focusing on the person rather than the position. Are they able to delegate? Yes. Are they able to critically think? Yes. What are our criteria for determining the worthiness of a leader? There are many different games that can be employed for skills training. I specialize in role-playing games. However, there are some other games that you can use for specific training interventions, including games like Settlers of Catan, in which you have to purchase tiles to build resources or negotiate with other players to trade wood for sheep to ensure you have enough resources to clothe and feed and shelter yourself and your settlers. Another good resource management game is it's a DC deck building game. I can't remember the title of it off the top of my head, but you collect superheroes or supervillains to enhance your personal set of resources to take out whatever big boss is waiting at the end. And it's kind of collaborative, but it's also kind of competitive, because I remember playing this game and I was collecting the Suicide Squad very quietly till somebody noticed that I had 5 of the 6 and then blocked me. It happens. I still won. And then also Minecraft can also teach creative problem solving, research skills, resource management, environmental adaptations. The list goes on and on for what Minecraft can teach. The list of games that can be used for training is extensive. I mean, there are so many games that you can use to train different aspects within a corporate setting for leadership development or even personal individual employee development. In order to effectively use these games, however, there needs to be a development of a training program to train practitioners to use these tools and implement them into business. Games, as we'll discuss in a moment, have the potential to bring dissimilar people together for a common goal. And in our context, that goal is the development of skills for the betterment of the person, the business, and the global marketplace. So here are just some of the applications. So as seen in this study, soft skills training and development, as well as personal and professional development, is one of the things that can be done using games. I have had personal clients, like private individual clients, come to me and say, hey, I want to work on resource management. I want to work on time management. I will give them mobile games to go and play, because the mobile game, you only have a certain amount of time to play it per day, first of all. And second of all, you have a certain amount of resources that you have to manage within that game. Games are training tools. DE&I leadership. allowing neurodivergent people the opportunity to emerge as leaders, allowing them the opportunity to put themselves in a new context, in a safe environment in order to make mistakes and in order to learn. Neurodivergency tends to keep people from trying new things because they're looked down upon by the people who are neurotypical. Oh, you don't know how to do that? Well, what good are you? No. You don't know how to do that. Let me help you. That's how it should be. And that's how games work. You don't know how to play this game. Let me teach you. It makes training even more accessible because games are accessible. They are available to literally everybody, and they're one of the best ways to include those who are on the fringes of society. Games can also build a bridge between the perceived generational gaps from the boomer generation, who are the current CEOs, to the Gen Xers, who are the quote unquote next in line, to the millennials looking to insert new and creative ideas, to Gen Z, who are just seeking to be heard and make a positive change in the world of leadership and diversity. And finally, games actively engage the players, meaning if you are using games for training, you are actively engaging those employees, which means they will have a tendency to take in that knowledge that they're learning much quicker, much more deeply, and be able to therefore then go out and apply it much more quickly. Participants believed that they were able to not only use the skills that they developed within the game setting, but were able to also identify the skills to be used, their comfort level in using those skills, and determine the effectiveness of the outcome from the use of those skills. In some cases, participants were able to predict with some success how they felt the results of certain scenarios would turn out if they were able to, just stop, breathe, and then incorporate the skills they had learned during gameplay. In training scenarios, many studies focus on the increase or decrease of the statistical data collected during surveys or assessments. Very few, however, query whether the participants understand or can even identify when they're employing the skills from their training sessions. This study's findings satisfy the research questions asked regarding how and to what extent participants were able to identify and employ the skills they were learning, as well as discuss their own personal development as it specifically related to the study. When discussing and planning leadership development, practitioners should focus on a holistic approach. Ideally, that approach would engage the participants in their own learning and actively engage them in their own analysis of their development. Engagement and analysis within the context of one's own personal development is the greatest critical success. I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Dr. Bowman because now it's question and answer time.
Wow, nice work. Gosh, there's so much you talked about, and I have so many questions, but I want to start first with Dr. Sundstrom. I know she's probably has a couple questions waiting. So without further ado, Dr. Sundstrom.
Thanks, Dr. Bowman. Chrissy, that was great. I think I learned more from your dissertation than I have from any dissertation I can think about. I am not a game player. My son is, and I haven't understood it. And I understand more about it now. And I've actually had a chance to talk to him about your dissertation. And he wants to read it, when it's all in that final version, because he's fascinated. He's a very, very sophisticated person. Works in high tech, and just thought it was pretty great that somebody was doing a dissertation on something as practical as this. A couple of questions for you in terms of your process. So I know that you were initially were looking for more participants. How do you think it might have changed things? Because you had some sort of mixed participation from some of the different folks. Not everybody completed all the parts of it. So in your own mind, as you think about it, what might you have done differently in terms of trying to get more participants in, and how do you think it may have? And I understand this is speculation, but how may it have changed the robustness of your data?
To make sure that I understand, you are asking how I would have gone about getting more participants and then how that would have affected the data.
Mhm.
Okay. I probably would have sought out, in a perfect world, if it wasn't COVID, there would have been signs actually that I had started putting together, recruitment signs that I was going to hang at local gaming stores for people to join and participate. Originally, the study was to be a comparative study between a virtual setting of tabletop role-playing games and in-person role-playing games. And then I had to not do that. So because COVID. So that was actually where I was going with it. I was going to do a comparative study to see what the difference was between being in person versus being online. The questions were completely different.
Yeah.
I don't know that the data would have been as robust as what I got from this study. I truly believe that if I had done anything differently with this study, I would not have gotten the results that I did.
Yeah, it's interesting. A comparison wouldn't have gotten you the richness of data of how the individuals experienced growth and learning through the development of the game. Likely not as much. Interesting. I wasn't in on that first part of your process, and COVID certainly threw a monkey wrench into a lot of different things.
Yeah, that was the proposal that was submitted the 1st of March and then was rejected the 15th of March.
Yeah, a lot of people had to kind of scramble a little bit because of all that. So, you're clearly a very talented woman, but this is probably the first time you did a research study like this. So what have you learned about yourself as a researcher and how it's developed your cognitive skills, your critical thinking, and set you up for what you want to do in the future?
Well, one of the things I learned about myself is I have a tendency to follow rabbit holes very easily and get lost in my research. And then I have all of this research and I'm like, but I don't actually need this. So I have to pare it down quite a bit. But beyond that, I have found that certain keywords in, like, for example, in Google Scholar, triggered different types of studies that I wasn't expecting. So I got to explore how a lot of this, like applied gaming and gamification, work in other industries like sports or medicine or early childhood development and education. And that actually helped to inform me as far as what I was doing using games, because I'm a huge proponent of using games in, from the time children are little, all the way up through when they're CEOs of companies, to help develop skills and educational purposes and keeping their brains active.
So in terms of actually, so did you find yourself changing if you were pursuing those corkscrew, rabbit hole, dead end, some kind of thing? Did you find yourself changing, and did that feel comfortable and natural? And how does that sort of set you up for what you want to do with these data later?
It absolutely changed how I approached this particular study. And it absolutely changed how I thought of games in general, because now, being where I am with what I want to do, I now have a basis of all of these different industries where I can go to and be like, hi, this is the sports industry. I noticed that you used war games in this particular scenario, and like talk about how that worked for them and what it was about that particular game that helped train what they were looking to train. Because I don't necessarily associate sports with games other than sports games. And, but there's pretty simple there, but there's a wide world of games out there. And I firmly believe that probably all of them can offer something to an individual, to a team, to a corporation as far as training purposes and education is concerned.
Right. Well, you know, they've taken a lot of concepts from business into sports teams. So the idea of looking at personality assessments and tendencies and teamwork and this kind of stuff and taking it into sports. So it makes perfect sense that we would take the way we play, the way we engage with other people, and take that into the business world. So I actually find it very fascinating. You know, do you know what happened to your sixth participant?
They just never responded to my emails regarding their journal prompts or their participation in the interview. Everybody was emailed individually regarding regarding each of those collection points.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to pass it back to Dr. Bowman. I might have a couple follow-ups on some of her questions, but very nicely done, Chrissy, and I loved your presentation style.
Thank you.
Agreed. Okay, so I have a few questions, but I'm going to try to keep it minimal. Can you give me an example of one of the theories? Let's use game theory, for example, or emergent leadership, that theory, but can you give me an example of how you used that theory in your decision making, your thinking, your analysis, and so on? First, I guess you would have to describe the theory to our audience, which is huge, by the way. Girl, there's 33 participants. Okay, back to you.
Well, critical thinking is probably the biggest one that I would have used during data analysis, and that would have involved observing the data and looking at what the data said and going through and making sure that it was consistent among the participants before considering it to be a theme of any kind, major theme, sub-theme, whatever. And I also used the adult learning theory ideas of, tacit versus
Declarative. And
starts with an I. I know my theories. I swear. Informal. Thank you. Informal. I know it starts with an I. Tacit versus informal. And in a lot of ways, I actually had to employ both tacit and informal learning styles with data analysis, because there is a very specific way you have to put your data into the program that I used, which was in vivo. And there's a very specific way you have to lay things out and use the program. So I had to follow these steps. But then when it came to the actual creation of themes and sub-themes and putting everything together, that's where I had to rely on my informal knowledge by being able to extrapolate the data and compare and contrast it to my existing research to make sure that everything was supported by what I had already studied.
yeah. Okay, so you earlier you mentioned that you had to add a research question. Clearly, there was something happening in the data where the knowledge was converging, right, in your findings, but then there was an actual outlier in themes. So can you just briefly tell us what happened there?
Briefly, what happened with the creation of the third research question from the data?
Yeah.
What was happening was I was seeing a lot of data coming in talking about mental health. And there was a lot of, I never thought I could do this because of this mental health issue. And it wasn't just the one person who gave me the disclosures. It was several. There were probably 3 or 4 people who were talking about, hey, this would be great for my nephew who has this particular mental health issue. And a lot of it had to focus on how they were able to make choices and step up and take charge of things in a situation where their normal life, they wouldn't, because they didn't have the confidence. They felt safe enough in the space that we had created to fail.
Yeah.
It's almost like you had an opportunity to kind of give people almost that proverbial sandbox, like try it out here, see how it fits and feels. And in that safe environment, they were able to explore some parts of their own thought processes and ways of interacting with people, because it was a game and it wasn't quote unquote real life. And maybe what emerged were some strengths they didn't know they had.
Mhm.
Correct. That is exactly how I feel about the data that was being presented from my participants.
Mhm.
Right, right. So when you're, let's apply this to the workplace. So assuming that the learning and development specialist and or practitioner wants to put together a development program for employees that are, that has the knowledge and ability to manage, right? But she wants to strengthen that team concept of management and so on. Is there, I mean, there's plenty of games out there, but
Mhm.
do we know what the specific skills are? Is there a document? Does it come with a list of skills that the players are learning, or is that something that you have to be knowledgeable about the game and then list? Because, go ahead, answer that first.
All right, I will do my best. If I understand your question correctly, you're asking if there is a pre-existing set of skills.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yes.
there is. The character creation process involves a character sheet that has a whole bunch of technical information on the sheet. For example, there are what they call stats. There are, I believe, 9. I'm just ballparking. It's like 8 or 9 stats, and they include strength, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, charisma. So I guess there's 6.
Wow, that can be aligned with the competency model.
Yes.
For that specific workplace or that specific position, such as management, right? Or
Yes.
supervisor, for that matter. Also, applied gaming has that team-oriented approach. So we already know that team building can occur. And really, it's a matter of looking at the competency framework of the organization, what their limitations are, where are the strengths in their employee population, and then choosing the game or whatever. Can you play these games? Let's say you put the CEO on a team and then an entry-level employee. Are they going to know who each other is on? Let's just use World of Warcraft or Dungeons and Dragons. Are they
Okay.
gonna know? Is there any confidentiality here?
Well, it depends. You're talking about 2 very different settings. First of all, in World of Warcraft, it's not likely that they would know.
Okay.
In Dungeons and Dragons, it's more likely they would know, because Dungeons and Dragons requires a voice component as you're speaking to do your actions and such. Even, I mean, if you're playing in a physical presence, I would know you're on my team because I can see you. If we're playing virtually, I can hear you, so I would know, I would recognize your voice.
Mhm.
If I knew you. But in World of Warcraft, since that is a massively multiplayer online role-playing game and everybody is represented by avatars, and they're usually not human. I mean, some of them are, but they're usually some other race or whatever. There's not really a way to know unless that person tells you.
Yeah, I could see that strengthening your major, one of your major themes of social interaction, right? If identity is held confidential, then the major, social interaction, that skill in general, and then sub skills under, like your problem solving and whatnot. So give us an example. where am I trying to go here? Of the major theme, social interaction with a sub theme. Give us an example in gameplay. Like, let's say I'm the character or whatever, I'll be the player. And can you give us an idea here? Because I'm not familiar with World of Warcraft or Dungeons and Dragons, excuse me. Give us an example so I think everybody can understand.
So to be clear, you want me to give you an example based on the major theme of social interaction within the context of a virtual world, or
Why did the players pop that theme out or share that? And they're, you know what?
in the case of my participants, none of them knew each other
Okay.
prior to this experience.
Mhm.
We did not use real names. I'm the only one who went by their actual name. Everybody was referred to by their character. And it made it very safe for them to make choices and decisions and interact, because there was no fear that they would be ridiculed by somebody that they knew.
Mhm.
To apply it to, let's say, World of Warcraft, we'll take,
How would they, yeah, where's that skill at in the game? And then how do you develop it?
okay. One of the things that came up during my study
Mhm.
in my Dungeons and Dragons setting was conflict resolution among the team members, among the participants. And that is something that also happens in a virtual world like World of Warcraft, where you have to manage the different personalities.
Mhm.
In this particular case, the sub-theme came up. It was supported by Brown, 1994, Rodriguez and Boyer, 2018, and Rudra et al. In 2011. Role-playing games in business settings have been used for years. One of the areas that businesses use role-playing specifically is in conflict resolution training, because you have that ability to play the role of somebody who is trying to negotiate and minimize a conflict. And even though it didn't happen in the actual role play situation, by the time it happened, I think it was like week 3 or so of the study, the participants felt comfortable enough with each other that they could say, hey, you keep talking over me, and that's really causing me a problem.
Ah, that's a great example. Thank you. That's where I was going. So how could, clearly you're the expert here. Just give us an educated guess of how you can apply your findings, the major themes or the skill transference to career development. Because I know that was one of your sub goals: application to leadership, application to career, and then work personal. How could you use this for that?
How can we use Dungeons and Dragons specifically for career development, or just applied games in general?
Just well, let's just stick to your study.
Okay.
How can that be related to career development?
In my opinion,
Okay.
the science is there to demonstrate that doing role-playing in general, but specifically games, helps to build team camaraderie and teamwork and team leadership. Because Dungeons and Dragons specifically allows for emergent leadership, that gives opportunity to every member of the team to take on the opportunity, or to take on the role of the leader for a given situation.
Yeah.
Which will help in turn to allow them to be able to take those skills that they're learning in that game and transfer it to the business world.
Right, right. It's almost like you need to understand what the purpose is of your interaction, or why you're playing the game. So again, clearly you're the expert. how can you move this study forward? What's next in the research or the scientific realm of your topic? What should come next?
I mean, I personally am very excited to study neurodiversity in relation to role-playing games, be they virtual, be they the virtual reality, or even just, you know, face-to-face tabletop settings. I would love to explore how those games can help propel neurodiverse people into leadership roles that they may not have been considered for previously.
Right, right, good answer. Dr. Sundstrom, jump in anytime, but I can keep going, but let me find out, what are you gonna do next? What does your journey look like? You know, you're a scholar, you're a scientist. What's your journey gonna look like? Have you had time to think about what you're gonna do over the next 3 years, maybe, or?
Honestly, one of the things that I'm looking at, I just started my own company recently.
Okay.
It's called Sunflower Entertainment Group LLC, and it actually combines like a lot of dissimilar things into one company. One of the things that I am looking to do is I'm looking to teach stage presence and public speaking through the core concepts of burlesque. I'm also looking to develop leadership initiatives through games, and kind of that's where my focus is, that's where my energy is going, to combine all of these things and produce a product that is unique and is beneficial to a global market.
Sounds interesting. So last question. What sort of problems did you encounter, and how did that impact the quality or the rigor of your data or the outcome in general?
What problems did I encounter with the data, or what problems did I
Overall, what sort of problems did you run into?
It was difficult
COVID.
getting,
Yeah, COVID would be one.
definitely COVID. Because of COVID, it was difficult to get participants who had the requisite experience, which was also a problem in and of itself. Because of COVID, people were able to play games multiple times a week. So my idea of having 3 or fewer years experience with role-playing games ended up being way too much experience, because even among the 6 that I had participating, one of them had never played before. Everybody else had weekly and bi-monthly games that they were playing, and 2 of them were also game masters, meaning they were facilitating the games that they were running. So that was like way more experience than I wanted for the games. But that was also I didn't think about the fact that there's nothing to do, so people are playing games.
Right, right. Okay, that's all I have for now. I want to turn it over to, if Dr. Sundstrom doesn't have any more questions, I'm going to turn it over to the attendees. They're free to ask questions now. You just unmute yourself. While Dr. Sundstrom and we're going to meet privately, and then I'll be right back. You good with that, Chrissy?
Perfectly fine. I know there's questions in chat, so I'll get to those first, and then we'll go from there.
Great.
Mute myself.
Alrighty. Okay, let's see. Okay, to address Jerry's question from before, I briefly saw it, but I didn't want to distract myself because that's my brain. My 6 participants, they were technically selected from the pool of 9, but it wasn't like I chose these 6 people. It was one person just never showed up for anything. They did character creation and then never played. One of the participants had to withdraw for mental health reasons unrelated to the study. And I am trying, and the 3rd one showed up for 1 game and just never came back. So I didn't technically choose the 6, They kind of self-selected as the ones who were there. They showed up. And I did not know them. Sentinels of the Multiverse, I'm not sure if that's the one. It was a DC game. I think you and I played it because I think you actually remember, Becky, the scenario in which I was gaining all the Suicide Squad, which was really funny. Jimmy, as a publisher of tabletop games, I'm curious if you found during your research if these concepts broadly applied across other types of card and board games, or were you specifically focused on the tabletop role-playing games in this? I was specifically focused on the tabletop role-playing games because I wasn't sure how I was going to play card games and other board games online free for everybody. So because I know you can do Talisman online via Steam, but you have to buy the game. So and I am not a huge fan of Talisman. It's not my thing. So I was pretty much focused on role-playing games for this particular study. However, I mean, there's opportunity to study a whole bunch of other games. Dr. Parker, I mentioned the inclusion of the neurodivergent. Did I gain any insight into other types of diversity? Specifically, did my players disclose their racial identities? Do I feel that game play could be used to reduce microaggressions in a business setting? Okay, there are several questions in there. So first of all, I did not ask for race because I did not find that it was germane to my study. I only asked for ages because I needed them to be older than 18. And I asked for gender identification so that I could establish that this is a safe place for you to be. So those were the only two of that type of demographic that I took. And I absolutely believe that gameplay can be used to reduce microaggressions in business settings. Absolutely, 100%. I have scenarios that I'm working on trying to write that would address that particular question, but I'm trying to do it in a very sensitive way since I know there's a lot of things going on with the different races in Dungeons and Dragons right now. Which means I'd probably just use Cthulhu and just put everybody as fish people. You know, and some of the fish people have stars on their bellies and the other ones don't. It's like the Sneeches, the star-bellied Sneeches from Dr. Seuss. Anyway, Lee Cole, asking as someone who runs D&D games regularly, was there a specific set of skills being aimed to develop based on the scenario, or was the focus more on general development of baseline skills? I actually had a selection of skills for them to choose from when I gave the intake questionnaire. And a lot of them, I took the ones that basically everybody wanted to develop, and those were like the main ones we focused on, and then we kind of pared it down and tried to get people to use some of the other skills that they had been wanting to develop. Everybody, to my knowledge, felt that they had accomplished what they had set out to do based on the intake form. And then Becky, what would the potential effect of how the participants subverted expectations / intended outcomes in the campaign? Oh, well, you know, that just makes it a little difficult to replicate is really what that boils down to. We were trying to document the way, okay, so first of all, the lovely image behind me here is the cover art for Waterdeep Dragon Heist, which is the campaign that we used for this particular setting. And there are multiple ways of running the campaign, and it all comes down to dice rolls and how you do things. I believe, because I'm not looking at my study right this second, I believe we used the autumn panel for how people were supposed to go through the dungeon part of the campaign. And it was during one of the weeks we were going through that the participants managed to talk their way out of an encounter that basically allowed them to go up to the street level instead of finishing off the dungeon. There was only like 2 or 3 rooms remaining. So it was something important to note in case somebody wanted to replicate the study exactly as we did it. But I think that answers your question. Let's see.
And also just how would that translate into real life, them being able to subvert those expectations of what is intended for them to do? They did what they weren't supposed to do.
Well, I think it would depend on the scenario, because like if you are talking about, like say for example, you're talking about a sales situation that's about to go south. If you are able to somehow turn that into a positive, that's not the intended outcome. The intended outcome, for at least from the buyer's standpoint, was they weren't going to buy this thing from you, but oh wait, you just made a really good point. So I mean, there are applications. Are they regularly occurring applications? Not necessarily, but they do come up just like they do in role-playing scenarios. I'm catching up, sorry. Jerry, were the participants required to remain anonymous during the study? If so, did you find them creating relationships outside of the game? And do you think that affected their ability to learn? I ask because I found that when I create a relationship with an instructor, it facilitates greater learning, attention, participation on my part. So the way it worked was we used Zoom and Roll20. I set up a link that they would just log directly into the game every week. So we didn't see their names in the lobby area. It was just they logged in, they were their character. And then we used Zoom, and I gave them probably about 10 seconds to change their name once they got into the room if it wasn't their character's name, and then I would change it for them. So everybody knew everybody by their character name. And it wasn't until the final session when everybody started saying, hey, I like you guys, I miss you. So they started exchanging information then. Lee, follow-up, did the random number element of rolling dice to determine outcomes affect the perceptions of those skills being developed? If so, was it in a positive or negative implication for those skills in the self-analysis of growth? One of the ways that I opted to have my GM run the game was I required the people to state what they were going to do, role play it, then roll the dice. And then it was up to them to figure out how to make the dice work with what they said. Or it was the GM's job to make the dice work with what they said. So if, you know, they're standing there talking to an evil NPC or whatever, and they are giving this persuasive speech about how love and light and everything will make the world so much better. And then they roll like a 2 and they have like a 5 in persuasion. So it's like, you know, 7. Oh, well, that's not going to be high enough, but there is a positive outcome because he is slightly swayed and he's at least curious about your church, you know, kind of thing. So it's like, there were ways to work around it to make them feel like they weren't failing when the dice weren't cooperating, but also stick with the, you know, general guidelines of the game. Oh my goodness, there's so many questions. Suzanne, how would you change the guidelines for a group of elderly participants? We know
I'm going to interrupt briefly. So we're going to stop the Q&A at 4 o'clock straight up.
okay.
Is that if that's okay with you? And
Yes.
then you can stay on and continue, but at least we can put an official close.
Yes.
And let you go about your day, the rest of
my day.
Okay.
Right. So how would I change the guidelines for a group of elderly participants? We know that staying brain active improves quality of life. There's not really a need to change the guidelines for, at least not for Dungeons and Dragons or other similar role-playing games. It's all active, creative problem solving, creative storytelling, collaborative storytelling. The dice rolls add the flavor. And I would keep it the way it is. Maybe work a little bit on more on the character development side of things to allow for the storytelling to be more prominent than the combat, unless, you know, you're really into math. Okay, and Jimmy, again, diverting from the intended route is a great example to those who work in UI/UX design in identifying ways the end user could break their designs. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Dungeons and Dragons is like the perfect way to determine how people are going to break your idea. Because they will do things like, oh, I'm just going to talk to this thing that I now fell in love with, and we're just going to make it so that we don't have to kill it. And yay, we just bypass the whole combat. So yes, it is very much a good tool for planning on how to plan for surprises like that. Are there any other questions? Looks like everybody's done. Yay.
I was muted, so I didn't have to interrupt. So Dr. Sundstrom and I met, and you know, I gotta let the audience know that Krista has been up. She has wrote her proposal, for example, and changed her research method at least 3 times. She's gone through 4 or 5 chairs, right? I've been on the committee since day 1, 3, okay? And so I can say, and I've experienced, I saw it, the effort she put into this research and the passion she has. I'm very impressed. Dr. Sundstrom, I know, is very impressed. A lot of hard times, a lot of anxiety, a lot of questions, a lot of frustration. I want to thank specifically Ken, her husband, who's been by her side all this time. Thank you, Ken. I also want to thank her family and friends like Mom and the others that are present, because, you know, whether you did not physically or cognitively participate, you were there, you had the shoulder she needed, you kept rooting her on, you know, you listened to her when she was upset, and I know that wasn't easy. So you also deserve a sincere thank you for, and gratitude overall. You made my job easier, I could tell you that. So if I miss somebody, well, thank you. Dr. Sundstrom, real quick, okay, all right.
I came in the latest to the party. And Chrissy, it's been a pleasure to watch your progress and your determination to get through this damn thing. Said very intentionally, because a dissertation is not an easy project to complete. So I feel proud of the work that you've done, and as the director of your academic program, I will tell you that you are the kind of graduate that we like to hold up to others and say, see,
Mm-hmm.
see,
That's
you don't
correct.
have to, you don't
That's
have to,
very correct.
you do not have to look like all the other trees in the forest. You may paint your tree whatever color you want it to be, as long as it's a tree, right? Or a shrub or a bush. We'll give you a little bit of that. In other words, you did your own thing. You designed a study that was very interesting and very different, but still academically sound. And for that, I thank you. I congratulate you. I was pleased to have a small role in it. And I will look forward to seeing you at graduation next year. I hope you'll come.
Yes. So Dr. Mackey, I would like to present you to the audience as Dr. Chrissy Mackey, PhD. You've earned the title. You're now a true scholar. You have been all along, the behaviors and whatnot, and a scientist. So you can outright stand alongside your peers, your scholarly peers now. So congratulations. I'm so proud of you. I wish your daddy was here. I'm sorry that happened, but I know he's here now and he's dear to your heart. He's right. He's in the room. Congratulations, Dr. Mackey.
Thank you.
I'm going to sign off and let you guys celebrate. I hope somebody breaks out a drink, you know, even if it's a virtual drink, but let's toast to Chrissy. Congratulations. I hope your move goes very smoothly, and that the cats and the turtles and all the little beasties get transported safely. Enjoy the new house. And Chrissy, if there's anything I can do for you, reach out. I hate to be the last person to say this, but there are some administrative hoops still to jump through. And someday, not in the not too distant future, you'll get a letter from the university that says, congratulations, you graduated. That's your official date. So just
Yeah.
look for
Thank-
that. Make sure they have your new address.
Thank you, Dr. Sundstrom. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You have been instrumental
You're
in
very,
getting her to the end of her journey.
you're very welcome. Thank you, Dr. Bowman, for your taking over and being such a great guidance steward. And
Welcome.
I'm going to run to my next meeting. So goodbye, everybody. Thanks for the great fan support club here. Bye-bye, Chrissy.
Bye.
Bye, Dr. Bowman.
Okay, so what do you want to do? We didn't talk about this part.
I'm gonna stop the recording at this point, I guess.
Okay, and then go without